Every singer's worst nightmare happened to 10-year-old Michael Jackson on live television. December 14, 1969. The Ed Sullivan Show. 20 million people watching. The Jackson 5 was performing I Want You Back on the most important TV show in America. This was their moment, their introduction to the nation. Everything they'd worked for. Michael hit the first verse perfectly. The second verse, flawless. The crowd was loving it. And then, in the middle of the bridge, it happened. His voice cracked. Not a small crack, not something most people would miss. A full, unmistakable, embarrassing voice break that echoed through the Ed Sullivan Theater. 20 million people heard it. His brothers heard it. Ed Sullivan himself winced. For a split second, Michael's eyes went wide with panic. This was it. The moment that could end everything. The mistake that people would remember forever. But what Michael Jackson did in the next 5 seconds didn't just save the performance. It created a moment that would be studied by performers for decades. Because Michael didn't freeze. He didn't apologize. He didn't pretend it hadn't happened. He did something so unexpected, so brilliant, that the audience forgot there had even been a mistake. December 14, 1969. New York City. The Jackson 5 had arrived in New York 3 days earlier. This wasn't their first performance. They'd been playing clubs and talent shows for years. But this was different. This was the Ed Sullivan Show, the show that had introduced America to the Beatles in 1964, where Elvis Presley had caused a national sensation, where careers were made in 3 minutes of live television. 20 million people watched Ed Sullivan every Sunday night. If America liked you on Ed Sullivan, you became a star. If America didn't like you, you disappeared. The Jackson boys understood the stakes. They'd been rehearsing non-stop since getting the call from Motown. Their single, I Want You Back, had been climbing the charts, but most Americans didn't know who the Jackson 5 were yet. This performance would change that. In the dressing room at the Ed Sullivan Theater, Joe Jackson gave his sons the speech he'd given them 100 times before. No mistakes. No excuses. You get one shot at this. Make it count. Jackie, at 18, nodded seriously. Tito and Jermaine checked their outfits in the mirror. Marlon, at 12, was too excited to be nervous. But 10-year-old Michael sat quietly in the corner, his hands trembling slightly. Catherine had traveled with them to New York. She knelt down next to her youngest son. You okay, baby? What if I mess up, Mama? What if my voice cracks? Michael's voice had been doing that lately. Not often, but enough to worry him. He was 10 years old, and his body was starting to change in small, unpredictable ways. You won't mess up, Catherine said gently. But what if I do? Catherine took his face in her hands. Then you keep singing. You remember what I told you? It's not about being perfect, it's about being present, about connecting with people. If you mess up, you keep going. You make it part of the performance. Michael nodded, not entirely convinced. 30 minutes later, a production assistant knocked on their door. Jackson 5, you're up in 5 minutes. The Ed Sullivan Theater held 461 people. Every seat was filled. Backstage, Michael could hear the audience buzzing with anticipation. He could hear Ed Sullivan's voice as he introduced other acts. His heart was pounding so hard he felt dizzy. You good? Jermaine asked, seeing Michael's pale face. Yeah, I'm good. But he wasn't good. He was terrified in a way he'd never been before. This wasn't a community center in Gary. This wasn't even a club in Chicago. This was 20 million people, live. No second chances. The production assistant appeared again. You're on. Let's go. The Jackson 5 walked onto the stage to applause. The lights were blinding. Michael couldn't see the audience, but he could feel them. Hundreds of people in the theater, millions watching from home. Ed Sullivan himself stood in the wings, arms crossed, watching with the critical eye of someone who'd seen every act in the world. The band started. The familiar opening notes of I Want You Back. Michael grabbed the microphone, took a breath, and started to sing. The first verse was perfect. Michael's voice was clear, strong, hitting every note exactly where it needed to be. His brother's harmonies locked in tight behind him. The audience started clapping along. Michael could feel the energy building. The second verse was even better. Michael's confidence was growing. This was working. This was going to be okay. He caught a glimpse of his mother in the wings. She was smiling, mouthing the words along with him. The chorus came, the whole group singing together, tight, professional, exactly like they'd rehearsed. Then came the bridge. This was Michael's big moment, the part where he had to hit a higher note and hold it, the note that showcased his range. He'd hit this note 1,000 times, in rehearsal, in their garage, in clubs, but as he opened his mouth to sing it, something went wrong. His voice cracked. Not a small crack, a full, squeaky, embarrassing voice break that cut through the music like a record scratch. The audience gasped. Some people laughed, not meanly but surprised. Michael's eyes went wide. For a split second, everything stopped. The music kept playing, but Michael heard nothing except the rushing sound of his own panic. In the wings, Joe Jackson's face went dark. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. Ed Sullivan winced. Michael's brothers kept singing, trying to cover for him, but everyone had heard it. 20 million people had just heard Michael Jackson's voice crack on live television. This was the nightmare, the thing every performer feared, the mistake that would define everything. Michael had two choices. He could push through, pretend it hadn't happened, finish the song and hope people forgot, or he could do something nobody expected. In that split second, with 20 million people watching, 10-year-old Michael Jackson made a choice that would become legendary. He acknowledged it. Michael didn't just keep singing. He grabbed the microphone with both hands, grinned at the audience, and let out a little laugh. Not an embarrassed laugh, a playful one, like he was in on the joke. Then he did something incredible. He turned the crack into part of the performance. Instead of trying to hit the note again the same way, he improvised. He added a little vocal run that avoided the problem note entirely. He spun around, adding a dance move that distracted from the mistake. And then, this was the genius part, he looked directly at the camera and winked. The audience erupted. They weren't laughing at him anymore, they were laughing with him. They were charmed by this 10-year-old kid who'd just made a mistake on live television and turned it into entertainment. In the wings, Catherine let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Joe Jackson's expression shifted from anger to something like grudging respect. Ed Sullivan, the man who'd seen everything, actually smiled. Michael kept going. He finished the bridge with a different arrangement than they'd rehearsed. His brothers, professional as always, adapted instantly. Jackie jumped in with a harmony that covered for the change. Jermaine adjusted his part. The song finished strong. The final chorus was perfect. The ending choreography was tight. The audience gave them a standing ovation. As the Jackson 5 took their bow, Michael caught Ed Sullivan's eye. The legendary host was clapping, actually clapping. Ed Sullivan didn't do that for everyone. Backstage, Michael expected his father to be furious. Instead, Joe walked up to him and did something he rarely did. He put his hand on Michael's shoulder. That was the smartest thing I've ever seen you do on stage. Michael blinked. I messed up. My voice cracked. Yeah, it did. And you know what you did? You owned it. You didn't run from it. You didn't pretend it hadn't happened. You made it part of the show. That's not something I can teach. That's instinct. Jackie walked over, grinning. Man, when you winked at the camera, that was genius. The audience loved it. I didn't think, Michael admitted. I didn't know what else to do. That's what made it perfect, Jermaine said. It was real. It was spontaneous. People connect with that. Catherine hugged Michael tight. I'm so proud of you, baby. Not because you were perfect, because you were brave. A production assistant approached them. Mr. Sullivan would like to speak with you. The family exchanged glances. This could go either way. Ed Sullivan's office was small but filled with photographs of every famous person who'd ever appeared on his show. The Beatles, Elvis, Ella Fitzgerald, legends. Ed himself sat behind his desk, still in his suit. He gestured for the Jackson boys to sit. "That was your first major television appearance," Ed said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Michael said quietly. "And your voice cracked in the middle of the performance." Michael's stomach dropped. "Yes, sir." "I'm very sorry, Mr. Sullivan. It won't happen again." Ed held up his hand. "Son, I'm not upset. I'm impressed. Do you know how many performers I've had on this stage over the years?" Michael shook his head. "Thousands. Professional singers, musicians, Broadway stars. And you know what most of them do when something goes wrong? They panic. They freeze. They try to pretend it didn't happen." Ed leaned forward. "You did something I've only seen a handful of times. You acknowledged the mistake and made it entertaining. You showed the audience that you're not just a talented kid who can hit notes. You're a performer who can think on his feet, who can turn a problem into a moment." He turned to Joe. "Mr. Jackson, your son has something special. Not just talent, intelligence, stage intelligence. That can't be taught." Joe nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan." Ed turned back to Michael. "How old are you, son?" 10, sir." 10 years old, and you've got better instincts than people who've been doing this for 20 years. I want you back on this show. All of you," he gestured to the brothers, "but especially you, Michael. You're going places." The phone at 2300 Jackson Street in Gary didn't stop ringing the next day. Friends and neighbors calling to say they'd seen the boys on Ed Sullivan. Music industry people calling Joe. Local newspapers wanting interviews. Everyone was talking about the Jackson 5. But what they were talking about most was Michael. Not the voice crack, the recovery, the wink. The moment that had turned a mistake into magic. Barry Gordy called Joe personally. "I watched the show," Barry said. "Michael cracking on live television could have been a disaster. Instead, he turned it into the most memorable moment of the performance. That boy has something that can't be taught." "He was scared he'd ruined everything," Joe said. "He did the opposite. He proved he's ready for anything." Most performers spend years learning how to recover from mistakes. Michael did it instinctively at 10 years old. Over the next few weeks, "I Want You Back" climbed to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. The voice crack moment became famous, not as a blooper, as an example of brilliant showmanship. Music teachers showed it to students as a lesson in stage presence. "See? That's how you handle a mistake. You don't run from it, you own it." Performers studied it. Watch what he does with his body language, the spin, the wink. He redirects the audience's attention. Years later, in a 1983 interview, Michael was asked about that moment. "The Ed Sullivan Show. When your voice cracked, were you terrified?" Michael smiled. "For about 2 seconds, yeah. It felt like my career was ending before it started. 20 million people had just heard me mess up on live television. What made you wink at the camera?" "Honestly, I don't know. It was pure instinct. My brain just said, if you can't fix the mistake, make it fun. So I did." "Do you think that moment changed how you approached performing?" Michael thought about it. "It taught me that perfection isn't what connects with audiences. Humanity is. The mistake made me relatable. The recovery made me entertaining. If I'd been perfect that night, people would have said, 'Oh, that's a talented kid.' But because I messed up and handled it well, people said, 'That kid is special.' Would you teach other performers to make mistakes on purpose?" Michael laughed. "No. But I'd teach them not to fear mistakes, because mistakes are going to happen. Your voice will crack, you'll forget lyrics, you'll trip on stage. What matters is what you do next. Do you freeze, or do you turn it into something the audience will remember for the right reasons?" In December 2009, months after Michael Jackson's death, Rolling Stone magazine published a list of the 50 greatest live performance moments in television history. Number 17 was Michael Jackson's Voice Crack Recovery on Ed Sullivan, 1969. The article read, "When 10-year-old Michael Jackson's voice cracked on live television, it should have been a career-ending moment. Instead, his instinctive recovery, acknowledging the mistake with a grin and a wink, turned it into a masterclass in showmanship." This wasn't a trained response, this was pure talent, the kind of stage intelligence that would define Jackson's entire career. Ed Sullivan, who passed away in 1974, had told his producers to keep that footage in the archives. "That moment," Ed had said, "is the moment I knew that kid was going to be the biggest star in the world. Not because he didn't make a mistake, because he knew exactly what to do when he did." December 14, 1969 lasted only 3 minutes and 30 seconds. But in those 3 minutes, 10-year-old Michael Jackson taught the world something that would become his trademark. That perfection is forgettable, but recovery is legendary. That mistakes don't define you, how you handle them does. That the difference between a good performer and a great one isn't never falling. It's getting up with style. Michael's voice cracked on live television in front of 20 million people. And instead of ruining him, it proved he was something the world had never seen before. Someone who didn't just perform for the audience, someone who performed with them. Someone who understood that the most powerful connection doesn't come from being flawless. It comes from being fearlessly, brilliantly human.